Welcome back to the Design Boss Dialogue podcast, the interior design business podcast for women who are ready to build businesses that feel as good on the inside as they look on the outside. I'm your host, Lisa Marie El Khadraoui, your interior design, business strategy, and soulful leadership mentor. And today, episode 97, we're going to dive into processes that align you with the right clients. So many designers tell me some version of the same story, okay? I'll learn as I go. I chase the clients. I'll figure out my positioning along the way. And I completely understand the instinct of all of this. It feels natural to learn through doing, especially in an industry as hands-on, as relational as ours. But we're taught, in a sense, to be reactive and responsive to whoever's in front of us, because that instinct serves us so well once we're actually in a client relationship. But today I want to talk about why the same approach applied to how you attract and filter clients in the first place quietly keeps so many talented women, talented designers stuck, sometimes even for years. And I want to talk about what actually changes the moment that you replace instinct with process. This is a longer conversation than usual because I think it deserves real depth in this. This is generally one of the biggest quiet drains on a designer's energy, and very few people ever name it directly. When you're constantly figuring things out as you go, every single inquiry becomes a fresh decision made from scratch, usually under some degree of pressure. Someone reaches out and you're evaluating them in that moment, assessing whether the project sounds interesting, whether the budget feels realistic, whether you have the capacity, whether something about the tone of their message feels like a good fit, with no real filter guiding the decision beyond a gut feeling, and often a quiet fear of turning away income. Now, there's no structure actually helping you discern who's actually the right fit for you and for your business specifically. So you end up saying yes to almost everyone who reaches out because you simply don't have a process in place that helps you tell the difference between a client who's genuinely aligned to how you work and one who's going to be a constant drain on your time and your energy. And I want to be honest with this. This isn't a failure of judgment. It's simply what happens when there's no system doing that work for you. You are relying entirely on instinct alone in real time, often while also trying to be warm and professional and completely reassuring on a call. This is exhausting in a way that's hard to fully articulate once you've actually lived it for a while. Every inquiry carries this completely quiet undercurrent of, is this actually the right one? Should I be saying yes? What if I say no and nothing comes in this month? That undercurrent, repeated inquiry after inquiry, year after year, adds up to a genuine, cumulative kind of fatigue. One that has nothing to do with the design work itself and everything to do with the absence of a filtering system. And this is why so many women in business don't actually create momentum in their businesses. And it's also, I think, one of the quieter reasons why so many designers end up working with clients who actually drain them rather than completely energize them. Without process, you're not really attracting aligned clients in any intentional sense. You're simply accepting whoever happens to find you, and you're really hoping for the best. And then months later, when that project turns out to be difficult, endless revisions, a client who second guesses every decision, someone who has never quite been the right fit, it's tempting to think the problem was simply bad luck, or a difficult personality, or scope creep. But often the real root cause sits much earlier on. It's in the absence of anything that should have filtered that mistake and that mismatch before it ever became a working relationship. I like to think about it a bit like fishing without a net. You're just standing at the water's edge, grabbing at whatever ever swim close enough for you to actually reach it, rather than having something in place that naturally sorts and filters for you before it even gets into your hands. It's complete tiring work, and it leaves the outcome almost entirely to chance, which we don't want to do when we are business owners. We can't operate like that. A clear process does something quite remarkable, and it's worth really sitting with. It's called a filter, and it positions and attracts the right people before they've even had a discovery call with you, because your visibility, your messaging, and your inquiry processes are all quietly speaking to a specific type of client, rather than trying to appeal to absolutely everyone who might conceivably hire an interior designer. This is something I've seen play out time and time again with the women I've worked with. I've had a woman recently tell me, almost with a complete sense of disbelief, this project has just landed in my lap. It's never felt easier. The money just came in. Is this actually how business is supposed to feel? And I'm like, yes, genuinely yes. When you built the solid foundations and started to gain real momentum underneath your business, this is not luck. This isn't a fluke or a particular lucky month or the stars have completely aligned. It's the natural, most inevitable result of complete alignment. When your process is clear and consistent, the right clients start to recognize themselves in what you're putting out to the world. They see your messaging and think that's exactly what I need before they've even spoken to you. And the friction that usually comes after misalignment, that awkward scope conversations, the clients who want something completely different from what you offer, the constant renegotiating of expectations simply starts to disappear because it was never invited in the first place. There's also a subtle benefit here, one that doesn't get talked about enough, okay? When your process is doing the filtering for you, you actually get to bring in more of your authentic self into your marketing and your messaging, rather than trying to be everything to everyone. You can speak specifically to the client you actually want in the language that generally resonates with them, without worrying that you'll alienate some broader audience. Let me bring this to life a little bit, okay? Because I think it's easier to nod along to this in theory, but it's so harder to actually picture it practically. So let's create a visual here, because you know me, I like to create visuals with everything I do and how I teach. Imagine your inquiry process right now has no real structure. Someone messages you on Instagram or fills in a vague contact form, and you jump straight onto a call to figure out what they actually need, whether it's the kind of work you enjoy or whether the budget is even close to realistic, all in that one conversation, often while you're also trying to be warm and personable and not scare them off. That's an enormous amount of filtering happening in one real time, under social pressure with very little support. And if the budget turns out to be wildly unrealistic for what they want, you're now in that awkward position of either turning them away after already investing 30 minutes of your time, or trying to somehow make the numbers work anyway against your better judgment. Now, imagine a version where your messaging has already done a great deal of that filtering before they even reach out. Your content speaks specifically to the kind of client and project you actually want, the scale, the style, the level of investment involved. Your inquiry form asks the right questions up front, so you already have a sense of scope and budget before you ever even get onto the call. Your discovery call has a completely clear, aligned structure that helps both you establish quickly whether this is generally the right fit, rather than that decision resting entirely on how the conversation is going to happen and flow. So in the first scenario that I gave you, you are doing all of the discerning yourself, client by client, conversation by conversation, and you're doing it exhausted and reactive. often after the fact rather than before. But in the second visual that I gave you, the structure is doing a great deal of that work for you before you've even, ended up spending half an hour of your time. The inquiries that do land on a call with you have already been pre-qualified, because in a sense, simply by how your business communicates before that conversation even actually happens, you have a filtering process. And this is something I teach in so much more in depth in Design Thrive, my foundational mentorship with Design Destiny, my 6-part foundational course. And we go really deeper into how to create filter systems and get onto that discovery call that goes into the consultations. I also want to touch on discovery calls specifically because this is often where the filtering breaks down even when the earlier steps have gone so well. A structured discovery call isn't about being rigid or sculpted in a way that feels impersonal. It's about knowing in advance the handful of things you generally need to establish before you commit to working with someone. Capacity, budget alignment, whether their expectations match what you actually deliver. Without that structure, discovery calls tend to completely drift into simply being a nice conversation, at the end of which you say yes because you felt friendly, rather than because you actually have confirmed the alignment between you, the client, and the project. This isn't about working harder to find better clients, and I want to be really clear about that, because I don't want anyone listening to this to hear this and think, great, one more thing I need to add to the hustle. It's quite the opposite, actually. It's about building the systems that quietly do the discernment work for you, so you're not relying purely on instinct and energy every single time an inquiry lands. That starts with a clear inquiry process that generally will filter alignment for you rather than simply capturing a name and an email address. Think about the specific questions that would actually tell you what you need to know before a call, like the project scope, the rough budget expectations, the timeline, the client's own sense of what they're looking for. Even a handful of well-considered questions on an inquiry form can do an enormous amount of filtering before you've spent a single minute of your time. Just think about that. That one little filtering process is going to support you so much more. It continues with messaging that speaks specifically to who you actually want to work with, rather than trying to appeal broadly to anyone who might one day need an interior designer. Now, this might feel counterintuitive at first. Narrowing your messages can feel like it's narrowing your opportunities and really honing in on your niche, but in practice, it tends to do the opposite. Specific, confident messaging attracts specific, confident inquiries. And it's supported by a discovery call structure that helps both you and the potential client establish quickly and completely honestly whether this is the right fit, rather than that being left to chance. We don't want that. We don't want it left to chance, charm, or how persuasive either of you happens to be feeling on that day. That is not alignment there. A good discovery call structure protects you as much as it protects the client, because it means you are making that yes or no decision from clarity rather than from social pressure or fear of losing an opportunity. When that structure generally exists, and I mean genuinely exists in your business, something shifts quite fundamentally. You're no longer chasing clients, trying to convince people who were never quite the right fit for you in the first place. You've been found consistently by the right aligned clients. And that changes the entire emotional experience of running your business, not just the practical one. And there's a kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your process is doing really well and working on your behalf, rather than everything depending on you getting it right from instinct alone every single time. So I want you to dive into your businesses and really think about, are your processes acting as the right filters, or is there leaks in your business? Business does not need to be hard. Yes, there will always be periods of growth and discomfort. That's simply part of leveling up. When you get to the edge and you feel that stretch and you feel that crunch, it never fully disappears, no matter how established you become. But generally speaking, business is as easy as you make it, because the more aligned it becomes, the better it becomes. Ease isn't the reward you get after years of struggle. It's what's available to you the moment the structure underneath your business starts doing the job properly. That's it for today's episode of the Design Boss Dialogue podcast, the interior design business podcast for women who are ready to build businesses that feel as good on the inside as they look on the outside. And if this has landed with you, please share it on Instagram and tag me. Spread the word for so many more of your designer friends. I'd love to generally know what has resonated, and come over and say hello to me on Instagram. I am at design_boss_diary. I love to hear from all of my gorgeous followers. I am Lisa Marie El Khadraoui, and I will see you next week for another beautiful, power-packed podcast.